They always had excuses. He just needs time. He's figuring things out. One day, he'll make it big. Meanwhile, I was expected to take care of myself. I bought my own first car, paid my own tuition, and never once asked for help. I was the responsible one, the one who didn't need rescuing, and because of that, they believed they could take from me without consequence. But they were wrong. I took a slow, steady breath, my gaze locking onto my mother's smug expression as she clutched the deed like it belonged to her. Like my years of sacrifice were just a footnote in their story. The audacity of it all sent a sharp, clear thought through my mind. This is not over. I turned to my stepfather first. You said you filed the paperwork? My voice was calm, too calm. James shifted uncomfortably, finally looking me in the eye. Yes, we finalized everything last week. Last week. Before they even invited me to my own housewarming party. They planned this. I felt Hannah step closer, a silent pillar of support. I didn't have to look at her to know her eyes were blazing with the fury I was trying to contain. Aunt Laura's lips were pressed into a thin line, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I took another deep breath. Think, Amelia, think. I turned back to my mother, my voice eerily steady. You're right, Mom, I am a nurse. I'll make more money. But you... I let my words hang in the air, watching the first flicker of uncertainty cross her face. You just committed fraud. Silence. Jacob scoffed. Oh, come on, Amelia, you're not going to sue your own family. I smiled then, slow and sharp. Who said anything about suing? I pulled out my phone, tapping a few times before holding it up. I just sent an email to my lawyer. You remember the one I had drawn up the original agreement? The one that states in clear, binding language that this house was to remain in my name? My mother paled. My stepfather swallowed hard. Jacob's cocky expression faltered. They hadn't expected me to fight back. They should have. And, I continued, lowering my phone, since you so kindly admitted to everything in front of our friends and family, I have plenty of witnesses. I gestured around the room. Shall I take a poll? Who here just heard my mother admit she stole my house? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. My mother's face was turning a blotchy shade of red. Good, I wasn't done. Here's what's going to happen, I said, folding my arms. You have 48 hours to transfer everything back into my name. If you don't, I'll file a lawsuit for fraud, report this to the authorities, and ensure Jacob's stable home is nothing more than a distant dream. You wouldn't dare, my mother whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. I tilted my head. Wouldn't I? I let the question settle. My mother had spent my entire life assuming I would roll over, that I would swallow every injustice for the sake of family harmony. But this was my breaking point. Jacob slammed his glass onto the counter, his composure crumbling. This is why no one likes you, Amelia. You're selfish. I laughed then, shaking my head. Selfish? I gave you everything. I gave this family everything. And the moment you saw an opportunity to take more, you did. That's not family. That's greed. My mother opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off with a raised hand. Don't bother, Mom. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it. Without another word, I turned and walked out, my heart pounding but my head high. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed. A message from Aunt Laura. Proud of you, sweetheart. They never expected you to stand up for yourself. But I did. I smiled, gripping the steering wheel. Neither did I. But it's about damn time. This was about respect, about dignity, about not letting them erase me like I was nothing more than an afterthought. I gripped the papers tighter, my pulse pounding as I scanned the letter from their lawyer, warning them that transferring the deed without my consent could be considered fraud. So they knew. They knew what they were doing was illegal, and they did it anyway. They didn't just assume I'd let it go, they counted on it. My mom's text glowed on the screen. Stop sulking outside. Come back in and be happy for your brother. I exhaled slowly, letting the words settle over me. Sulking? That's what she thought I was doing? Not grieving the years of sacrifice they'd stolen from me, not reeling from the betrayal, not piecing together the legal case that was about to unravel everything they had so carefully orchestrated. I stared at the party inside through the back window, watching as my mother clinked glasses with Jacob, as if they hadn't just robbed me blind, as if I wasn't even there. That was the moment something in me hardened. They thought I would stay quiet, that I would cry in the shadows, lick my wounds, and walk away like I always had. But they'd underestimated me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Andrew's number. It rang twice before he picked up. "Mia?" His voice was groggy. He was probably getting ready for bed. "Andrew," I whispered, gripping the papers so tightly my fingers ached. "I need your help. My family stole my house." A pause. Then, sharp and alert. "Tell me everything." I laid it out in quick, clipped sentences. The down payment, the agreement, the forged transfer. The letter from their lawyer confirming that what they'd done was illegal. When I finished, Andrew let out a slow breath. "Mia, this is fraud. They didn't just trick you, they committed a crime." I swallowed hard. "What do I do?" "You let me handle this," he said, his voice steel. "They won't see it coming." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than anger, other than betrayal. I felt ready. Sliding the papers back into my bag, I turned on my heel and walked inside, head high. My mother spotted me immediately, her eyes narrowing as she waved me. "Over." "Finally," she sighed. "Try to at least pretend to be happy for your brother." I met her gaze, a slow smile curling at my lips. "Oh, don't worry, Mom." I picked up a champagne flute from the table and raised it high. "I'm about to give Jacob a celebration he'll never forget, because by this time tomorrow, they wouldn't be celebrating. They'd be scrambling. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about reclaiming the part of me they'd spent years chipping away. My confidence, my self-worth, my ability to say enough. With steady hands, I texted Andrew, "Are you free tomorrow? I need legal help." His response was immediate. "Hannah told me what happened. Come to my office at 9 a.m. Bring everything you have." I exhaled, bracing myself before stepping back inside. My mother, James, and Jacob were huddled in the living room, deep in conversation, probably making plans for my house. Their laughter stopped when they saw me. My mother arched an eyebrow, her arms crossed. "Finally decided to stop being dramatic?" she asked, her tone dripping with impatience. I smiled, small, measured, and just enough to unsettle them. "Actually, I just wanted to say thank you," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You've helped me see things very clearly." They exchanged confused glances, expecting more pleading, more tears. They had no idea that the woman standing in front of them wasn't the same one they had blindsided just hours ago. I reached for my purse. Behind me, Jacob chuckled. "See? She's fine. She'll get over it." I turned to him, meeting his smug expression head on. "No, Jacob, I won't get over it." I held his gaze, letting the weight of my words sink in. "But you'll wish I had." The next morning, I sat in Andrew's office, gripping my coffee cup like a lifeline, as he combed through the documents spread across his desk. His expression darkened as he flipped through each page, shaking his head. After what felt like an eternity, he leaned back and let out a low whistle. "Mia, they really messed up." He tapped the lawyer's warning letter. "This isn't just shady, it's outright fraud. You provided the down payment. You signed the original agreement. And we have written proof that this house was meant to be yours. They can't legally give it away." I swallowed hard. "But they already did." My voice wavered. "The deed is in Jacob's name." Andrew smiled slightly, but there was a sharpness in his eyes. "A fraudulent transfer can be reversed, and I have a friend at the DA's office who would be very interested in this case. What they did? It's criminal. We're talking grand theft, wire fraud, potentially even forgery." My stomach twisted. I don't want my parents to go to jail. Even after everything, I couldn't stomach the thought. Andrew leaned forward, his voice firm but not unkind. "Mia, they stole $175,000 from you. They committed fraud. And, from what I see here, they might have forged your signature on some of these documents. They're betting on you being too kind to fight back." He was right. They always had. My phone buzzed, another text from my mother. This time she'd switched tactics. "You're overreacting. It's just money. Family should share." I let out a slow breath. "I want my house back," I said, my voice stronger now. "And I want them to understand they can't treat me like this anymore." Andrew nodded, already typing. "I'm filing an emergency injunction to freeze the property so they can't alter it. Then we'll move to void the transfer. They'll be served by tomorrow." For the first time since that party, I felt lighter. Not because the fight was over, but because I'd finally chosen to fight. That night, I headed into my evening shift at the ICU, my mind clearer than it had been in days. I was midway through rounds when my phone started buzzing nonstop in my pocket. I ignored it at first, but when I got a break, I glanced at the screen. Jacob had called 7 times. My mom? 12. The texts were endless, some pleading, some furious, others filled with barely veiled threats. Then, one final message from Jacob that made me smile. "What the hell did you do?" I silenced my phone and tucked it back into my pocket. Let them panic for a while. I met Jacob's bitter glare with a steady, unwavering gaze. Oh, I am. For the first time in years, I was truly completely happy, not just because the house was legally mine again, not even because of the settlement, but because I had done what they never thought I would. I had fought back. And won. 2 weeks ago, I had been the dutiful daughter, the easy target, the one who always said yes, who always forgave. Today, I was something else entirely. I picked up my pen and signed the final document, my signature bold and firm. Across the table, my mother sniffled dramatically into a tissue, while James kept his gaze fixed on the floor, as if refusing to acknowledge my existence would make this humiliation easier to bear. Jacob, however, looked like he had swallowed a lemon. His shoulders were tense, his fingers twitching against the tabletop. The smug arrogance he had worn at my housewarming party was gone, replaced by barely concealed rage. His wife, Victoria, hadn't come with him. From what I'd heard, she had packed up and left 2 days ago after discovering he had been hiding their financial problems too. Apparently, my stolen house was just one of many desperate attempts to keep his crumbling life together. I slid the signed document back to the notary, who gave me a small nod of approval before stamping it. The finality of the moment settled over the room like a weighted blanket. "That concludes everything," Andrew said, sliding copies of the paperwork into a folder. "The deed is officially transferred back to Mia. The settlement is processed. And per your agreement, this notarized admission will remain on file." Jacob glared at him. "Is this really necessary?" Andrew smiled coolly. "Absolutely. That way no one can ever rewrite history." My mother let out a soft, pitiful sob, dabbing at her eyes as if she were the victim. "Mia, sweetheart, can't we put this behind us? We're family." I leaned back in my chair, studying the woman who had raised me, who had stolen from me, who had chosen Jacob again and again without hesitation. I searched for guilt, remorse, anything that suggested she truly understood what she had done. But there was nothing, just regret that she had been caught. "We stopped being family when you decided my life savings were worth more than my trust," I said quietly. "So, no, we can't put this behind us." James cleared his throat, his discomfort palpable. "You got your house back and then some. What more do you want?" I exhaled, shaking my head. "Nothing from you. Not anymore." Jacob scoffed. "I hope you're happy." I stood, gathering my things as I met his glare one last time. "Oh, I am." And I meant it. That night, I stepped through the front door of my house, letting the familiar scent of freshly polished wood and clean linen wash over me. I had hired a locksmith first thing in the morning, changing every lock and security code, ensuring that no trace of my parents or Jacob remained. Hannah arrived with takeout and a bottle of wine, her expression triumphant as she stepped inside. "So, how does it feel?" I looked around, my gaze landing on the kitchen where my mother had once waved the deed in my face, claiming I didn't need this house. I thought about Jacob's cruel remarks, about how I was supposed to just accept that I didn't matter as much as he did. I poured 2 glasses of wine, handing one to Hannah before clinking mine against hers. "It feels like justice." We sat on the floor of my empty living room, eating straight from the takeout containers and laughing about the absolute disaster Jacob's life had become. But as the evening stretched on, the laughter faded into a quiet, content silence. This house wasn't just a victory. It was a new beginning. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just existing, I was living on my terms. And that, more than anything, was the real win. "You've ruined everything." I met Jacob's glare with unwavering calm. "No," I said, my voice steady. "You ruined everything when you decided to steal from me. I just made it right. They filed out of the office, my mother trailing behind, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. She hesitated, silently pleading for me to acknowledge her. I didn't. The time for guilt trips and manipulation was long over. Andrew turned to me with a satisfied smile and handed over the freshly signed deed. "Congratulations, the house is officially yours." I exhaled, feeling lighter than I had in months. But I wasn't finished yet. "Actually," I said, reaching into my bag and pulling out another set of documents, "I'd like to sell it." Andrew raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" I nodded. My family had already begun spreading the word about the misunderstanding with the house, spinning a story that painted them as victims of some legal mix-up. What they didn't know was that I had already received a generous offer from a developer eager to turn the property into apartments. Hannah nearly choked on her coffee when I told her later that day. "They're going to lose their minds when they find out," she said, grinning. "They thought you'd let them stay there forever." I stirred my latte, a slow smile forming. "That's exactly why I'm selling. They need to understand that they have no power over me anymore." The next day, I signed the papers. The developer was thrilled, my real estate agent was thrilled, and for the first time in my life, I was free. The profit, combined with my settlement, meant I could finally buy my dream cottage with a garden and still have savings left over. As I drove away from the closing, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from my mother. I didn't have to listen to know what it would say. I could already hear her tearful pleas, the desperate attempts to make me feel guilty. I deleted it without a second thought. Some might call it cruel, but I called it boundaries. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to set myself on fire to keep them warm. Let them figure out their own lives. I had a cottage to furnish and a garden to plant. The weeks after selling the house were transformative. I found a charming cottage just outside the city, with a wraparound porch and a yard big enough for the flower beds I'd always dreamed of. Hannah helped me move in, and together we painted the walls in soft, peaceful colors. Nothing like the bold, overwhelming tones my mother always insisted were proper for a family home. My phone still lit up with messages from relatives. Some were furious, calling me selfish for selling the house instead of giving my parents time to figure something out. Others went for guilt trips, claiming my mother cried herself to sleep every night. Only Aunt Laura stood by me. She made it clear to the rest of the family that they should be ashamed of what they had done. "I ran into your mom at the grocery store," Sarah told me over brunch one Sunday. "She was telling anyone who'd listen about how ungrateful you are. But people know the truth now. That statement you made them sign? It's made the rounds." I smiled into my mimosa, knowing the narrative had shifted. No longer was I the difficult daughter who refused to help her brother. Now I was the hard-working nurse whose family had tried to steal her savings. My mother's victim act wasn't working anymore. Jacob and Victoria officially separated, and he moved back in with our parents. Through the grapevine, I heard that he had finally been forced to get a real job, a sales clerk at an electronics store. His first taste of actual work in years. Sometimes on my way home from work, I'd pass by their rental house. It was modest, a far cry from the home they had tried to steal from me. I didn't take joy in seeing them struggle, but I did feel a sense of justice. At work, things were looking up, too. Once I stopped letting my family drain my energy and resources, I was able to focus on myself. I applied for a promotion to charge nurse and got it. Better hours, better pay, and most importantly, a future that was truly my own. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living in anyone's shadow. I had finally reclaimed my life. My colleagues had noticed the change in me long before I had fully grasped it myself. I smiled more. I spoke up in meetings instead of letting others take credit for my ideas. I no longer volunteered for every holiday shift just because I had no real family obligations, because, in truth, I did. I was my own family now. One evening, as I sat on my porch, the sky painted in hues of gold and lavender, my mother's number flashed on my phone. Instead of the old, familiar anxiety tightening my chest, I felt nothing, calm. A quiet certainty as I let the call go to voicemail. Later, out of curiosity, I played the message. "Mia, sweetheart," she started, her tone heavy with forced sweetness. "I was just thinking. Jacob's been struggling with rent lately, and I thought, well, you've always been so responsible. Maybe you could help him out, just until he gets back on his feet." I didn't need to hear the rest. I deleted the voicemail and turned back to my gardening catalog. I'd already selected seeds, plump tomatoes, crisp cucumbers, and my favorite, violets. The flower beds were prepped, the soil rich and waiting for new life. It felt symbolic in a way, clearing out the weeds of toxic relationships to make space for something beautiful to grow. Hannah often joked that I should write a book called How to Stop Being a Doormat in 3 Easy Steps. Maybe she was onto something. Turns out, all it took was losing my life savings, standing up to my family, and finally putting myself first. Simple, really. 6 months after selling the house, my life had settled into something I never thought possible: peace. My garden flourished, the first tomatoes ripening on the vine, violets blooming in neat, colorful rows. I had friends, real friends. I'd joined a book club, started yoga, and even begun dating again, something I'd put off for years because my family had always drained every ounce of my energy. The family drama hadn't disappeared entirely, but I had learned to manage it differently. My mother still called occasionally, always when she needed something, but I stuck to my boundaries. "I'm not in a position to help," I'd say, my voice steady, no matter how many tears or guilt trips followed. That phrase had become my shield, impenetrable against manipulation. Jacob's life, on the other hand, had unraveled completely. Victoria had filed for divorce after discovering he had secretly taken out credit cards in her name, leaving her with tens of thousands in debt. When she came to me, desperate and exhausted, I connected her with Andrew. He helped her navigate the legal mess, and for the first time in my life, I found joy in truly helping someone who deserved it. Then, one Sunday morning, as I knelt in my garden tending to the new seedlings, a familiar car pulled into my driveway. I recognized it instantly. My mother stepped out slowly, looking older than I remembered, her usual air of superiority worn thin by stress. She lingered by the fence, hesitant. "Your garden is beautiful," she said quietly, her voice softer than I'd expected. "You always did have a way with plants." I didn't stop working. "Thank you, but you shouldn't be here without calling first," she sighed, wringing her hands. I know, I miss you, honey. And, well, your father and too. We're selling the house. We can't afford it anymore, and Jacob's expenses," she trailed off, looking at me expectantly, like she thought that would be enough. I set my trowel down and stood, brushing the dirt from my knees. "Mom, I'm not giving you money. That chapter is closed." She flinched but recovered quickly. "I wasn't asking for..." She stopped mid-lie, sighed, then admitted, "Okay, maybe I was. But can you blame me for hoping? You're doing so well, and we're your family." "Family doesn't steal from family," I said evenly. "Family doesn't forge signatures or justify theft just because one child is their favorite." Her lip trembled. But I didn't waver. "You made your choice, Mom. Now you're living with the consequences." For the first time, I saw true regret flicker in her eyes. But regret and change aren't the same thing. She left in tears, but I didn't feel guilty. Instead, I felt proud. Proud of the person I'd become. Proud of the life I'd built. One that wasn't controlled by their expectations, their needs, or their endless demands. That evening, I hosted a small dinner party on my porch. Hannah, Sarah, and a few friends from work gathered around, laughing as we sipped wine and watched fireflies dance in the dusk. As I leaned back in my chair, warm from the wine and the glow of twinkling garden lights, I realized something profound. I had finally reclaimed my life. This was what family truly looked like. Not obligation, not guilt, not the endless cycle of taking and expecting more. It was choice. It was respect. It was the people who stood beside you, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. To boundaries, Hannah said, raising her glass with a knowing smirk. To growth, I added, thinking not just of my flourishing garden, but of the person I had become. A year has passed since I finally stood up to my family, and every day I'm still surprised by the transformation in my life. My cottage has become my sanctuary, a home filled with warmth and peace, 2 things I never realized were missing when I was constantly drowning in their expectations. The garden I once dreamed of is now overflowing with life. Last summer, I grew so many vegetables that I started donating the extras to the local food bank. My mother used to mock my love for gardening, calling it a pointless hobby, a waste of time. Now it brings me joy and helps others, something she never understood. Without the constant emotional drain of family emergencies, my career has thrived. I was promoted to nursing supervisor a few months ago, and my colleagues tell me I seem different, more confident, more at ease. Setting boundaries at home taught me to set them everywhere else too. I no longer apologize for taking vacation days or saying no to extra shifts when I need rest. Hannah teases that I've become a bit of a legend at the hospital. New nurses seek me out, not just for advice on patient care but on standing up for themselves. Just last week, a young nurse pulled me aside, her voice quiet but steady. "If you could stand up to your whole family," she said, "I can stand up to one person." That moment made me realize something. My strength wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a ripple effect, inspiring others to reclaim their own power. As for my parents and Jacob, they're still struggling, but their problems are no longer my burden. They made their choices, just as I made mine. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do, for others and yourself, is to let people live with the consequences of their own actions. It was never about revenge, it was about self-respect. The money they stole was just that, money. But what I gained by standing up to them, that was priceless. I found my freedom, my peace, my sense of worth. The other day, while organizing a box of old things, I found a photo from that housewarming party, the last moment before everything shattered. I stared at their faces, the smugness in their eyes, the entitlement in their smiles. But to my surprise, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt gratitude, because their betrayal forced me to become stronger, to stop chasing their approval and start valuing myself, to walk away from toxic relationships, even when they came wrapped in the word family. Spring has arrived again, and my garden is already in bloom. Sarah brings her grandchildren over to help plant new flowers. Hannah and I have our weekly coffee dates, where we laugh at how different I am, from the woman who used to drop everything to answer my mother's every demanding call. Even Victoria stops by sometimes with my nephew. She says the garden has a healing effect on her too. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine now. Authentically, unapologetically mine. I've learned that the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting better. Every flower that blooms in my garden, every peaceful evening on my porch, and every boundary I refuse to let them cross is a reminder I chose me, and I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat.